For as long as you can remember, you've been told there is a you inside your head, a little commander sitting in a control room, making decisions, steering your life, and defining your identity. But what if I told you that science has searched for decades inside the human brain, scanning every corner, mapping every neuron, and found nothing of the sort? No CEO at headquarters, no executive pulling levers, no permanent self hiding behind your eyes. Instead, they discovered something far more unsettling, and at the same time infinitely more liberating. What they found was not a solid identity, but a vast open space, a luminous emptiness, alive yet silent, where thoughts, feelings, and perceptions appear for a moment, then fade, like waves rising and dissolving in the ocean. Imagine an orchestra performing a flawless symphony, but without a conductor on stage, no central figure guiding the music, only pure coordination arising from hidden harmony. That's what your consciousness is, that's what you are. And this discovery shatters everything we've been taught about who we think we are. Pause for a moment and feel the weight of this. All your life, you may have carried the belief that you are the sum of your thoughts, the voice in your head, the story of your past, the judgments you carry, the fears you nurture, and the desires you chase. But what happens if all of that is just a narrator, a commentator, not the real you? What if the very self you've been trying to fix, improve, or defend is just an echo, a character in a story, while the true essence of who you are has been silently watching all along? This question touches a deep human pain, the fear of not knowing who we are. We cling to labels, to roles, to identities because the alternative feels terrifying. Without them, we fear emptiness. But what if that emptiness isn't a void to fear, but the source of everything? What if behind all the noise of thought, behind the chatter of your inner voice, behind every mask you've ever worn, there is something eternal, untouchable, and absolutely free? This is where your story begins today. A story not about chasing something new, but about uncovering what has always been present. It's a journey into the very heart of awareness, where science and spirituality finally shake hands, and where you discover that you are not who you think you are. You are far more. And I want you to make a choice right now. Anchor yourself in this moment by writing the number 111 in the comments below, not as a routine, not as a superstition, but as a declaration. 111 is the symbol of alignment and new beginnings. By typing it, you're telling yourself and the universe, I am ready to step out of the illusion of the small self and tune into the frequency of pure awareness. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Not for me, but for you, because this is only the beginning. Each step of this journey will peel back another layer of illusion and guide you deeper into the truth of your being. Stay with me until the end, and I promise something inside you will never see life the same way again. For generations, humanity has lived with a comforting assumption that somewhere inside our skulls, hidden beneath layers of bone and tissue, there must be a central me, a commander at the controls, a little executive seated in a private office, receiving information, weighing options, and issuing commands. This imagined control room of the self has shaped not only our culture, but our language, our religions, even the way we parent children. We speak as if there's a singular I running the show, making decisions, carrying responsibility, and steering our lives forward. But when neuroscience entered the stage with its powerful tools, brain imaging, neural mapping, the careful observation of electrical and chemical signals, the myth began to unravel. Scientists combed through every corner of the brain, expecting to find the headquarters of the self, the throne room where identity sits. They found activity, yes. Complex networks firing in perfect choreography, like the blinking of countless lights in a city at night. They found patterns of astonishing beauty and depth, connections weaving thoughts, emotions, and memories together. But the one thing they expected most, a control center, a master operator, was missing. There was nobody home, no CEO, no pilot in the cockpit, no central commander issuing orders. This revelation was not just surprising, it was deeply unsettling. If there is no control room, then who is making decisions? Who is speaking inside our heads? Who is the I that feels so continuous, so persistent, so undeniably real? The truth, as revealed by these studies, is both simple and profound. The self, as we imagine it, doesn't exist. What exists instead is a fluid, dynamic process. A continuous stream of neural events rising and dissolving, thoughts sparking into existence and fading away, emotions coloring the moment and then shifting into something else. It is like a river, always flowing, never the same water twice, yet giving the impression of permanence when observed from the shore. The metaphor that scientists often use is an orchestra without a conductor. The instruments play, melodies intertwine, rhythms emerge, crescendos rise and fall, and yet no single figure stands at the center directing the performance. The music seems coordinated, but the coordination is emergent. It arises from the relationship of the parts themselves. The brain operates in this way. Millions of neurons interact, but there is no tiny person orchestrating from above. And this realization destabilizes us because we have built our lives on the assumption of an I at the center. If there is no one in the control room, then who am I? Who is reading these words? Who decides whether to smile or to frown, whether to turn left or right, whether to say yes or no? This question strikes at the heart of human identity, and it is one of the most profound discoveries of our age. But here's where the story takes an even deeper turn. Neuroscience's inability to locate the self does not mean there is nothing at all. What it reveals is that the sense of self we cling to, the continuous narrator inside our minds, is an illusion, a construct, a clever trick of the brain's storytelling. Beneath that illusion, something else is happening, something more fundamental, more mysterious, more expansive, something that science struggles to measure, but that every human being can directly experience. Because while there is no little you sitting in the brain, there is awareness. Something notices the flow of thoughts. Something perceives the rise and fall of emotions. Something experiences the story without being the story. And that something is not located in a single region of the brain. It is not a product of neural firing. It is the open space in which all experience happens. When you realize this, the myth of the control room dissolves. You stop searching for the imaginary pilot at the controls. You stop believing that the voice in your head is the master of your destiny. Instead, you begin to see life for what it really is: a symphony without a conductor, a storm without a center, a dance of infinite movements happening in mysterious harmony. And you begin to suspect, perhaps for the first time, that the real you is not a fixed identity at all, but the vast awareness that silently holds the entire performance. This discovery changes everything. It reshapes how we think of freedom, responsibility, and even purpose. Because if you are not a little self hidden in the brain, then perhaps your true identity is something larger, something timeless, something that cannot be located because it is not a thing. It is the field in which all things appear. And this is where the story naturally leads us, to the next great revelation. If the self is not inside the brain, then what is the brain actually doing? Could it be that the brain is not the producer of consciousness, but more like a receiver, tuning into something far greater? Once the illusion of the control room begins to collapse, a new and even more breathtaking question arises. If there is no little self sitting inside the brain generating your experience, then what exactly is the brain doing? For decades, the dominant story of science was that the brain somehow produces consciousness, like a factory manufacturing a product. But as research deepened and insights from both neuroscience and quantum physics converged, a startlingly different picture emerged. Consciousness, it turns out, doesn't come from the brain. Consciousness is not a byproduct of matter. Consciousness is the fundamental field in which matter itself arises. The brain, rather than being the source of awareness, behaves more like a receiver, a sophisticated radio that tunes into a signal that has always been there. Think of a radio for a moment. When you turn it on, music fills the room. But does the radio create the music? No. The music was already present, invisibly, in the space around you, carried on unseen waves. The radio doesn't produce the broadcast. It simply translates and amplifies it. In the same way, your brain doesn't generate consciousness. It tunes into it, interprets it, and expresses it as your lived experience. This realization changes everything. Because if consciousness is not something fragile, produced only while neurons fire in the right sequence, then it is not limited to the brain. It is not born when you are born, nor does it vanish when you die. It is deeper than biology, older than humanity, and more fundamental than the universe of forms. It is the field in which universes themselves appear and dissolve. And this is why so many spiritual traditions across time and culture have pointed to the same truth. You are not the body, not the mind, not the fleeting story you tell yourself. You are the awareness in which all of it unfolds. The sages of India called this the Atman, the timeless witness beyond change. Modern mystics describe it as pure consciousness, the ground of being. And now even science, through its inability to locate a self inside the brain, begins to hint at this same conclusion. But here is where most people get lost. They confuse the narrator in their heads with awareness itself. They think that the running commentary, the voice that evaluates, praises, criticizes, tells stories, is consciousness. And as long as you are trapped in that confusion, you remain blind to the deeper truth. You mistake the radio's static for the music itself. You confuse the commentary with the silence in which commentary appears. The brain as a receiver of consciousness explains not only why you cannot locate a solid self in neural tissue, but also why practices like meditation and stillness feel so transformative. In those moments of silence, the chatter quiets, the signal clears, and you begin to experience the field directly. The awareness that is not produced, not conditioned, not limited. And when you glimpse that field, something extraordinary happens. You begin to realize that the story of me you've carried your entire life is just that, a story. The real you has never been the fragile character in the story. The real you is the awareness that watches the story unfold, untouched, unchanged, eternal. This understanding doesn't just shift your perspective intellectually, it reshapes your very existence. Because once you see consciousness as the field, the foundation, the unbroken presence behind all experience, you stop grasping for control and start attuning to alignment. You stop fighting with your thoughts and begin resting in the awareness that holds them. You stop fearing the death of the story and begin awakening to the timelessness of what you truly are. And this leads us to the next great unveiling in our journey, the internal narrator, the voice in your head that you have, likely mistaken for your true self. To understand pure awareness, we must first expose the mechanisms of this narrator, how it deceives us, and how to finally see beyond it. If the brain is not the producer of consciousness, but the receiver of it, then why does your experience of life feel so noisy, so filled with endless commentary? Why does it seem as though there's always a voice inside your head, narrating, labeling, praising, criticizing, encouraging, doubting, worrying, planning, replaying? This is the internal narrator, the invisible companion you carry everywhere, and perhaps the greatest magician of all. For most of your life, you have mistaken this narrator for your very self. The internal narrator wears many masks, but it usually speaks through three main modes. First, it is the storyteller. It weaves together fragments of experience into elaborate narratives, connecting dots that don't always belong together. You get cut off in traffic, and the narrator convinces you it was a personal attack. A friend delays replying to your message, and the narrator whispers, "They must be angry with you." The storyteller is endlessly creative, but it blurs imagination with truth, leaving you lost in tales of your own mind. Then, it becomes the judge. This voice is sharp, relentless, and rarely satisfied. It compares you to others, measures your worth against imaginary standards, and finds you lacking. Sometimes it softens and offers praise when you do well, but even that praise comes from the same source, the conditioned mind trying to maintain control through evaluation. Whether it scolds or congratulates, the judge keeps you trapped in a cycle of self-measurement that never ends, and finally, it becomes the cheerleader. It offers encouragement, cliché phrases, and motivational mantras. It says, "You've got this. Everything happens for a reason." While it sounds positive, it is still the same mechanism at work. Your mind trying to manage your experience by adding commentary. Even encouragement is still noise. Even positivity, when generated by the narrator, keeps you from touching the pure silence of awareness itself. What makes the internal narrator so deceptive is how subtle it can be. It doesn't only speak in words, it communicates through images, through sudden emotions, through the flush of pride or the sting of shame. That moment of self-consciousness when you walk into a room and imagine people are judging you. That's the narrator. That surge of confidence when you feel you're in control. That too is the narrator. It is always there, constructing a sense of me, a false self stitched together from fragments of thought. But beyond all of that, untouched by all of that, is pure awareness, the silent witness. Awareness doesn't judge, doesn't narrate, doesn't cheer. It simply notices. It holds every story without ever being altered by them. Just like the sky is never harmed by the storm, your awareness is never touched by the clouds of thought. And here is the great mistake most people make. They confuse the narrator with awareness itself. They believe that thinking about being present is the same as being present. But presence is not commentary. Presence is silence. It is direct, immediate, unfiltered. And until you learn to see the narrator for what it is, you remain imprisoned in its endless noise. Now let me pause here, because if this is resonating with you, if you feel something stirring inside, that quiet recognition that you've been living too long as the narrator's prisoner, then I need to ask you something important. Subscribe now. Not as a casual action, but as a choice, as a declaration. By subscribing, you are saying, I no longer want to be trapped in the voice. I want to learn to rest in the awareness behind it. This is more than joining a channel. This is joining a journey. One where we dismantle the illusions of the mind together and step into the silence that sets us free. Because once you truly recognize the narrator for what it is, the doorway opens to something extraordinary. The silent witness, the true awareness that has been here all along. If the internal narrator is the restless storyteller, weaving endless dramas in your mind, then the silent witness is the one who sees it all without ever getting entangled. Imagine for a moment that you are sitting on the edge of a vast field, watching the wind move through tall grass. You notice every movement, every ripple, every change of direction. But the act of noticing doesn't alter the field. The grass sways, the wind shifts, and yet your role remains the same, observing. That is what pure awareness does with your thoughts and feelings. It sees them, allows them, and remains utterly untouched by them. This is why sages and mystics across cultures have used the metaphor of the sky. The sky does not resist the storm. It does not cling to the sunlight. It doesn't prefer the gentle breeze over the hurricane. It holds it all, embraces it all, and remains exactly what it is. Clouds come and go, storms rage and dissolve, but the sky itself has never once been scarred. In the same way, you have never truly been harmed by a single thought or emotion. They come, they go, but the silent witness that perceives them remains unbroken. What makes this recognition so challenging is that the internal narrator can disguise itself as presence. It can speak in tones of calm wisdom. It can produce insights that sound spiritual, that sound profound, and convince you that you are resting in awareness when in fact you are still trapped in thought. Look how present I am, it might whisper. Look how deeply I understand. But even this is only another mask of the narrator. Pure awareness doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to proclaim, I am here. Awareness has always been here, long before any thought ever claimed its existence. To glimpse this silence is to feel something astonishing. You realize that awareness has been watching your entire life unfold without ever interfering. It was present when you were a child, watching the innocence of play. It was present in moments of joy, holding your laughter like music in its stillness. It was present in moments of deep pain, quietly noticing the ache in your chest and the tears in your eyes. And it is present now, reading these words. Through every shift of circumstance, through every change in your body, your personality, your beliefs, awareness has remained the same. Silent, steady, untouched. There is a peace here, a peace so profound that it does not depend on anything. It is not the peace of everything going right. It is the peace of realizing that you are not the waves but the ocean, not the clouds but the sky, not the stories but the presence in which stories arise. This kind of peace cannot be disturbed because it was never created. It simply is. But here is where the mystery deepens. If pure awareness is not personal, if it does not belong to you as a separate entity, then what is it? Whose awareness is it? Could it be that the same silent witness looking through your eyes is the very same one looking through mine? Could it be that there is only one awareness expressing itself through countless perspectives? This realization is like standing at the edge of a vast ocean at night, realizing that the tiny waves at your feet are connected to the same infinite body of water stretching beyond the horizon. Your thoughts and feelings may be unique waves, but the awareness that holds them is the same infinite ocean. And this is the doorway into the next revelation of our journey. The universality of awareness itself. The truth that consciousness is not divided among us, but shared, one field expressing itself through many lives. If the silent witness inside you is not touched by thoughts, not limited by feelings, not bound to personal stories, then the question naturally arises. Is it really your awareness at all? Or could it be something far more vast, something not confined to an individual identity? This is where the great unveiling occurs. The realization that the awareness reading these words right now is not different from the awareness that is writing them. It is not different from the awareness watching the sunrise in the desert, or the awareness in the eyes of a child laughing, or the awareness in the stillness of a monk meditating in the mountains. It is one awareness, one infinite field, flowing through countless experiences. The contents of consciousness are what change. Thoughts differ, emotions vary, stories diverge. My mind tells me one story, your mind tells you another, and someone on the other side of the planet is listening to an entirely different narrative altogether. But the space that receives those stories, the presence in which they appear, is the same. Just as every wave is unique in shape and size but still belongs to the same ocean, every mind carries its own story, but all are expressions of the same awareness. This is why mystics throughout history have described awakening not as discovering something new, but as remembering what was always there. The Upanishads declared, Tat Tvam Asi, you are that. Jesus prayed, that they may be one, just as you and I are one. Mystics from Sufi poets to Zen masters all point to the same horizon. The self you believe to be separate is an illusion. In truth, You are inseparable from the consciousness that animates all of existence. When this insight is no longer just an idea, but a direct experience, everything changes. Imagine walking into a crowded street. Before, you saw individuals, strangers with unknown intentions, some friendly, some irritating, some threatening. But with the vision of universal awareness, you realize that behind every pair of eyes is the same light, the same stillness, the same silent witness. The faces are different, but the seeing is one. The stories are unique, but the awareness that holds them is identical. How could you not feel compassion when in truth there is no other to be against you? This realization is not just spiritual poetry, it is practical transformation. Anger loses its grip when you realize the one you are angry at is, at the deepest level, yourself. Loneliness dissolves when you realize you have never been separate from the field that contains everyone and everything. Even fear of death begins to soften, because you see that what you truly are cannot die. The body may dissolve, the mind may fall silent, but awareness itself has no beginning and no end. It is the timeless backdrop against which all of life plays out. And yet this universal awareness is so simple, so ordinary, that it is easy to miss. It does not arrive with trumpets. It does not demand recognition. It has been here every moment of your life, watching your first steps, your first heartbreak, your first triumphs, and every ordinary day in between. You didn't create it, and you cannot lose it. You can only notice it, and when you do, life itself begins to feel lighter, freer, more spacious. But there is a reason this truth remains hidden for most people: conditioning. From the moment you were born, culture, family, and belief systems began shaping the narrator in your head, filling it with labels, judgments, and stories about who you are and what the world is. Even when you glimpse the vastness of universal awareness, the narrator pulls you back, insisting on separation, insisting on identity, insisting on fear. To live from the truth of awareness, we must expose how conditioning has programmed the inner voice and learn how to see beyond it. If awareness is universal, limitless, and untouched, why then do we so often feel small, anxious, or unworthy? Why do we live as if we are trapped inside a narrow version of ourselves, repeating the same patterns of fear, doubt, and self-criticism? The answer lies in conditioning, the invisible web of beliefs, expectations, and cultural scripts that begin shaping us long before we even know how to speak. From infancy, the narrator in your head starts collecting material. The words your parents used with you, the tone of their voices, the atmosphere of your home, all of these became the raw ingredients for the voice you still hear today. A child raised with constant criticism often grows into an adult whose narrator echoes those same judgments endlessly. A child raised in anxiety often grows into an adult with a narrator that is always scanning for threats. These patterns run so deep that most of us mistake them for our natural identity. Then comes culture, layering even more programs into the system. If you grew up in a culture that idolizes competition and achievement, your narrator will obsess over performance and compare you to everyone around you. If your culture prizes conformity and harmony, your narrator will focus on how well you fit in, punishing you whenever you stand out. Neither is the truth of who you are. Both are borrowed scripts, written long before you had the chance to choose. Religion and spirituality, too, leave deep imprints. Raised with the belief that you are fundamentally flawed or sinful, your narrator may condemn your every action. Raised with the belief that you are inherently divine, your narrator may inflate itself into a spiritual ego, subtly judging those who appear less awakened. Whether uplifting or punishing, these voices are still conditioning, still stories imposed on the raw simplicity of awareness. Even so-called positive habits of thought are part of this trap. Gratitude practices, affirmations, or encouraging self-talk can soften the harshness of the narrator, but they do not silence it. They simply refine its tone. You may notice the difference between an inner critic that says, "You're worthless," and an inner coach that says, "You're doing great." One feels heavier than the other, but both are still the same mechanism: commentary, not consciousness. The tragedy is that most people live and die inside this conditioning, never realizing that what they hear is not who they are. They mistake the borrowed voice for their authentic being. They spend decades trying to satisfy its demands, chasing its approval, fearing its punishments, and never discovering the silence beneath it. But here is the liberating truth. Conditioning can shape the narrator, but it can never touch awareness. No matter what culture, family, or religion imprinted upon you, awareness itself has remained pure, untouched, radiant, like a mirror that reflects every image but is never stained by them. To awaken is not to destroy the narrator, nor to silence every thought. To awaken is to see the narrator for what it is, conditioned noise, and to rest again in the witness that has been free all along. This recognition is a turning point, because once you see the programming clearly, you stop confusing yourself with it. You no longer ask, "Why am I this way?" You begin to ask, "Who is it that notices this way of being?" And the moment you turn toward the noticing, rather than the story, the spell begins to break. And when the spell breaks, you discover the path back home, the present moment, the direct experience of pure awareness that has always been here, quietly waiting beneath the noise of conditioning. That is where our journey leads next. Once you see the weight of conditioning for what it is, the question becomes, how do you return to the truth? How do you step out of the tangled stories of the narrator and rest again in the simplicity of pure awareness? The answer is not complicated, though the mind will try to make it so. The answer is presence. Direct, unmediated, wordless presence. Presence is not a technique. It is not about forcing silence, nor about suppressing thoughts. It is the recognition of what has always been here, beneath every thought, beneath every judgment, beneath every story. Presence is what you taste in those rare moments when the mind falls quiet without effort. Watching a sunset so beautiful it steals your breath, holding a newborn child, listening to music that seems to stop time. In those moments, the narrator pauses, and what remains is awareness itself. The practice, then, is not about adding anything new to your life, but about noticing what is already here. Right now, as you read these words, thoughts are appearing. Emotions may be stirring, sensations ripple through your body, and yet something is aware of it all. That awareness is not caught up in the words, it is not defined by the emotions, it simply sees. The moment you recognize that, you are present. Presence has been described as a still lake. When the water is turbulent, you cannot see clearly into its depths. But when the water settles, the bottom becomes visible, calm and transparent. In the same way, when your mind is constantly stirred by the narrator, your vision of reality is clouded. But when you allow thoughts to pass without chasing them, without clinging to them, clarity arises. You don't have to get rid of the turbulence. You only have to stop identifying with it. And here is the beautiful irony. The more you try to be present, the further away presence seems, because the narrator takes over and begins to measure your success. Am I present enough? Did I fail? Did I lose focus? But presence doesn't ask those questions. Presence simply is. You don't need to create it. You only need to remember it. It is as ordinary as breathing, as close as your next heartbeat. Direct experience of awareness is like finally tasting the chocolate instead of endlessly describing its flavor. No amount of thinking about presence can substitute for being here now. When you rest in presence, even for a few breaths, you discover that it is not dull or blank. It is vibrant, alive, filled with peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, and joy that doesn't need a reason. This return to presence is not an escape from life. It is the opposite. It is life itself, experienced without the filter of the narrator. Ordinary activities, walking, sitting, cooking, speaking, are transformed. Each moment becomes sacred because each moment is recognized as arising in the field of awareness. Presence reveals that you were never separate, never lost, never lacking. You were simply distracted by the voice in your head. And when you make presence your home, everything changes. Fear loosens. Judgment softens. The search for meaning quiets, because meaning is discovered in the immediacy of being. You stop grasping for a future moment to save you, and you stop replaying the past as if it defines you. Instead, you live, here now, the only place awareness has ever existed. This is the true return, not to an exotic state, not to a mystical peak, but to the simplicity of the present moment. To awaken is not to travel somewhere new, but to finally recognize where you have always been. And with this recognition, our journey reaches its natural conclusion. The profound discovery that you are not the seeker, not the story, not the passing voice in your head. You are awareness itself, timeless, boundless, whole. And so we arrive at the end of our journey, which is not really an end at all, but a return to what has always been true. We began with the illusion of the control room, the comforting but false idea that a little you sits inside your brain, pulling levers and making decisions. We saw how neuroscience pulled back the curtain and found no pilot, no CEO, no commander at headquarters. We discovered instead an orchestra without a conductor, a river without a source, life unfolding on its own. Then we explored the deeper revelation. The brain is not a factory producing consciousness, but a receiver, tuning into a field more ancient than time itself. We saw how the internal narrator, with its stories, judgments, and cheerleading, tricks us into mistaking commentary for awareness. But behind the noise, untouched and unchanging, we found the silent witness. And that witness, as we discovered, is not personal at all. It is the same awareness shining through every pair of eyes, the universal field expressing itself as countless experiences. We peeled back the layers of conditioning, family, culture, religion, that program the narrator, and keep us bound to borrowed scripts. And then we saw how the return to presence dissolves those scripts, not by fighting them, but by resting in the timeless space that notices them all. Finally, we arrived at the heart of the truth. You are not the story. You are not the seeker. You are not the storm of thoughts or the character in the drama. You are the awareness in which it all arises. You are the silent field that was here when you were 5, here when you were 25, here when you are 95, and will remain here when the body itself dissolves. This is the liberation. Not that you have to become something more, not that you must chase enlightenment like a prize at the end of a race, but that you realize you were never separate from it. You are awareness itself, timeless, boundless, whole. The search ends not in acquiring, but in remembering. The seeker and the sought are one, so take a deep breath right now. Feel the stillness that is noticing even this breath. That stillness is you. It has always been you, and it always will be. Before you go, let me ask you to make one simple but powerful choice. Subscribe now. Not as a habit, not as a routine, but as a declaration that you are ready to keep remembering, to keep returning to the truth of who you are. Each time we meet here, you will be reminded that you don't need to seek outside yourself. You only need to notice the awareness that is already here. Because in the end, you don't have to force, you don't have to chase, you don't even have to search. You simply have to be. And the moment you rest in that truth, you realize you are and have always been awareness itself.